The impact of all of this on a country that's seeing better than 100,000 new cases a day now for almost every day over the past week. The implications as well. What happens if we start shutting things down again? Maybe not a full lockdown, but something close enough, especially for restaurants and small businesses that can ill afford it. Dave Dodson with us right now, the Stanford University School of Business professor, also Francis Newton-Stacy of Optimal Capital, the director of strategy. Francis, it would come at a tenuous time when a lot of these guys are just getting back on their feet. What do you think?
Absolutely. The statistics are horrifying. So about 60% of small businesses that closed because of COVID are permanent closures. And that was an August reading. So that's before this uptick. And then the PPP funds are exhausted this is also an August reading because I get a data dump quarterly. 84% of small businesses that got PPP funding have spent all of it. And for those that are open, 25%, they're still 25% lower than they would have been pre-pandemic. So this is absolutely devastating. And it's hard for small businesses to get loans. The Fed recently lowered the threshold for the Main Street lending facility, but the terms are still a bit onerous for most small business owners. So many are just walking away.
You know what I wonder about, Professor, is what happens if these, closures, limitation and hours, distancing provisions go into effect and last a while. Some of these guys, restaurants in particular, are just limping along, even with the president, allowance for some business. It could put them under, couldn't it?
Oh, for sure, Neil. And I agree with Francis. If we don't solve this problem quickly over the next 5 weeks, when these restaurants get most of their revenue, which they need in order to get through the next 3 months, those winter months, they are going to be gone. We think that our analysis is about 1/3 of the restaurants are going to be gone if they can't get the revenue in the next 5 weeks. And these are legacy businesses, multi-generation businesses. We look at the stock market and the stock market's up. But one of the things we need to be thinking about is, what does this economy look like when we get out of this? Because we're not going to get out of this in Q1. It's going to be more like Q2. And the ineptitude in Washington, D.C. with their failure to pass a PPP program or a second wave is staggering for these companies. They could survive the pandemic. They can't survive the COVID pandemic and the coma, the legislative coma that we see in Washington, D.C.
The good news, if you want to call it that, and it's, Francis, is that this will reignite concerns to get stimulus going, if even in a lame duck of Congress that seemed unthinkable before. But how likely is that? Clearly, the street isn't counting on it, but your thoughts?
Well, the CARES Act sort of has all of its benefits expire December 31st, and that's obviously before we even know who's really won the Senate. So I'm hoping that the political posturing will be tamped down, even though it's not going to be finished given that Senate race, to come together and get the fiscal stimulus done, because Americans are hurting and those eviction moratoriums end on December 31st, and that's going to be rough.
Professor, too, if you think about it, Germany did all the right things, was shutting down businesses, was pushing the mask stuff, and it's in a world of hurt and shutting things down again. The same with Ireland, the same with Italy, the same with Portugal. So these are countries that were model cases for how you handle this. And now they're revisiting all of this. So we could be wrong in the approach that we're taking now to sort of get this under control. It might be all for a waste at that.
Well, Neil, we might be wrong in terms of how we're handling the epidemic itself. But we're creating this false choice, which is either it's the economy or it's people's health. It's not. To what Francis was just saying, Washington, D.C. learned late spring how to do a good PPP program. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad. But we have lessons learned. And instead, we squandered 5 months of arguing in Washington, D.C. These businesses will be fine, no matter how bad the pandemic is, if we can give them a bridge to the other side. But what we're telling them is we're saying, we're not quite sure what to do with the pandemic, and you're on your own. So just take care of yourself, because we're so worried about the elections and all the kind of drama that goes on in Washington, D.C., that we've forgotten that the people's business is not getting done there. These people need help.
Yeah, and both parties need to help them. Dave, final word. Francis, thank you both very, very much.